It's time to translate the science, data, and research behind dairy cattle genetics into real-world applications for farmers around the globe. Brought to you by the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, the CDCB CowCast begins now. Welcome back to the second episode of the CDCB CowCast. I am once again your host for this episode. I'm Katie Schmidt. I am the Industry Relations Manager for the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, which we like to just shorten to CDCB. And joining us for this second episode is Fiona Guinan, a newly minted PhD and almost a year on staff with CDCB as our livestock data analytics expert. Did I get that right, Fiona?
You did. Thanks, Katie.
It's great to have you with us. I know for viewers and listeners who joined us for that first episode, they might recall that we had teased at the end of that episode that our second guest would be talking about female fertility, and we were queued up and ready to go for that, but we do have a change in schedule as Fiona joins us, and we're choosing to tackle a foundational component of U.S. genetic evaluations first before we go into that topic. For those who are new to this story at CDCB, this foundational piece is the National Cooperator Database. And as our livestock data analytics expert, Fiona is the perfect person to walk us through this. Some quick background on Fiona. Like I mentioned, she joined us in August of 2025 in this role. However, she first came to CDCB in 2019 as a summer intern. That was after she finished her bachelor's degree in agricultural science at University College in Dublin. And then from CDCB internship, she went down to the University of Georgia, got her master's down there, and then popped up to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she did her PhD and did her dissertation exploring genetics of resilience and consistency indicators in U.S. dairy cows using daily milk weights. So very, very familiar with phenotypic data that we're going to talk about today. We're happy to have you a part of this, Fiona. I think to get us started, let's cover the data flow side of things. So before we get into the data, how does it get there? What does that look like? How do farmers connect to this National Cooperator Database?
So, thank you very much, Katie, for the introduction. It's great to be here to talk about a project that I collaborated on since really I was an intern. So, when we're thinking about the data, in particular the National Cooperator Database, this data comes in from herds that are participating in the DHI program, so the Dairy Herd Improvement Program, meaning that they are participating in milk recording. And so we have this visual here that shows how the data flows from the farms all the way to the National Cooperator Database. I'm going to focus on the top left corner of this diagram in terms of the phenotypic data. So, a producer decides that they want to participate in milk recording so that they can better manage their herds and have more information regarding their cows and how they're performing. So they reach out to the field service affiliate, and that technician comes to the farm, takes a milk sample. That milk sample then flows to the lab where they collect the fat, protein, the components, aspects of the milk sample and send it back to the farm. If they decide, then they can send it to the Dairy Records Processing Centre. You can see here, DRPC for short. We have 4 DRPCs, AmeliCore, Agritech Analytics, AgSource, and Dairy Records Management Systems. And so then the data flows to the National Cooperator Database, and CDCB are stewards of this National Cooperator Database. Now, it's important to note here that the data flows based on the disclosure provided by the herds. So some herds, they receive back their records or the data from the lab, and the data doesn't flow any further depending on what they want. Other farms have the data sent by the DRPCs to the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, to the National Cooperator Database, to be used for genetic evaluations. And then the third one is it can be used for evaluations and for research purposes.
And before we jump away from this graphic, Fiona, just for people to understand, like you mentioned, we're going to talk about that top chunk of the data flow, but there are other key players in this data system that supports national evaluations. So people will see the Purebred Dairy Cattle Association on here with our breed registries and our breed associations. The membership represented by the National Association of Animal Breeders, which would be our bull studs. And then those really big players, too, on the bottom of the screen with the genomic nominators and genomic laboratories that are commercializing genomic testing out on farms. So just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of players in this data flow. But as Fiona mentioned, we are going to focus on that top chunk and what it takes for that data to get to the national database. So, Fiona, you were starting to talk about the data that has to be basically disclosed in order to get to us. And it's coming in through the DHIA system, through the DRPCs, and then into this national database. And that's really where we embrace the saying of quality in, quality out when we think about genetic evaluations. So, what kind of quality checks or certifications are in place before data can get to the national database to ensure that we have that quality and quality out standard?
That's a great question, Katie, and a very important step in how the data comes into the National Cooperator Database. So it starts with the sample taken by the technician, the DHI technician. It's sent to the lab. We have a standardized procedure for collecting the data, and that's all recorded, and it goes into further a data collection rating. So there's different methods for how the data can be collected on the day of testing, we'll say. And so we incorporate that information then later on in terms of our editing system and for the genetic evaluation purposes. Once it goes to the lab aligns the sample with the individual cow ID. And then at the DRPC level, if they are sending the data to the DRPC, they combine the individual cow information from the on-farm software and the lab data. They create herd management reports for the producer, for consultants, and so on. And then they do a lot of standardization of the data. They also put the data into a format to send to CDCB. And we receive the data as the test day data. So we have that at a herd level, an individual cow. We also receive reproductive data, health data. Now we're receiving milk and speed data and so on from the DRPCs. Now that's a lot of data quality that the data has already passed through. And when it gets to CDCB, we also have our own internal editing system. So it goes through our edits, we call it, and then to get into the National Cooperator Database. And then beyond that, for the national genetic evaluations, we have an extraction process, which also uses edits as well. So it's passing through a lot of checks all the way from that milking to the genetic evaluation.
And when you say edits, it doesn't mean somebody is there retyping numbers, right? It just means that the data is being filtered out because it doesn't meet the standards, right?
Correct, exactly. Yes, it's a legacy system that's been built and we inherited from USDA Agile.
People might be surprised to know, but Fiona, what's the number one reason data doesn't make it to the national system outside of doesn't have the authorization to be shared?
I would say animal identification is the number one reason that it doesn't make it into the National Cooperator Database.
And what does that mean to us?
So that would mean individual 840 USA ID. So why this is important in terms of genetic evaluations is because we need to merge that data, as you mentioned, with the data coming from denominators from the purebred dairy cattle associations, NAB and so on, in order to get the pedigree information and to understand the pedigrees and to estimate the PTAs eventually from the outcome of the evaluation system.
I never imagined how much trouble Animal ID was going to be in animal records until I started here. I grew up on a registered Holstein farm, so our cows have very great IDs, and we know we can track their pedigrees. My eyes have been opened. So for listeners and viewers, Animal ID is a really big problem when it comes to data quality and accuracy, and it impacts not just us at CDCB, but also farm management and being able to provide good management of your herd and accurate management of your herd. So pay close attention, I guess, is the moral of our story there. But Fiona, now that we have this landscape kind of established in terms of what data is making it in, maybe why is it not, what share of U.S. dairy cows and farms are represented in this system, and what do we know about them?
In terms of this aggregated data, in terms of national performance metrics that we're providing, This is for the herds that are participating in milk recording and decide to send their data to the National Cooperator Database. There are statistics that are also published by the National Agricultural Statistics Service, and we incorporate one of those statistics into our national performance metrics, which we'll come to later on in this episode. But from that standpoint, the NASS, they do a survey of a sample of producers in each state, and then they provide an estimate for milk production and numbers using data from the federal and state administrative side of it. So that's an estimate, whereas our records are actual records that are making it to the National Cooperator Database. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of edits that go into that as well. So just for clarification, there can be herds that are participating in milk recording. They don't send their data, and we're not capturing that in these statistics, just to be clear on that. So in terms of those numbers then from the NASS, the USDA statistics, there are 9.5 million dairy cattle in the US and about 23,000 herds they're estimating. And on our national performance metrics for participation in 2025, we have just over 9,000 herds and 3.8 million cows participating in milk recording and also sending their data to CDCB.
Which for listeners not US based, maybe, how does that compare to past years, Fiona, from like a national herd level?
So between 1997 up until 2025, that those are the years we have on Web Connect, which I'll show in a little bit. We see that range, and it starts at about 37% and goes up to about 45%. And now we've been at 40% for the last 5 to 10 years, with not a lot of change or variation there in terms of the number of cows that are participating in milk recording in relation to the entire US dairy cow population.
Let's go to Web Connect and let's look at that participation.
So I'm going to start here on the CDCB homepage and navigate you guys how to get to the national performance metrics that we've been talking about here today. So the first thing, we're going to go to this bar here at the top, Web Connect. We'll click on that. Once you click on that, a new tab will pop up. We'll come here. This is the default or the landing page, the queries. However, we're going to go to the national performance metrics up here in the top right hand corner. You'll notice that there is a login option here. I'm not logged in. These are available to anybody that wants to access them. You know, this could be from the producer side. Obviously, it's interesting in terms of benchmarking, but also they can be used for research purposes and to look at trends in various different metrics that we're going to dive into here. So the first thing is, we do have these statistics generated for cattle and goats. The goats information is more limited, so I'll just focus on cattle here for now for the purpose of this episode. The first thing that pops up is the participation. As I mentioned, the participation in DHI programs. And so other statistics that we generate are the 305AA standardized lactation averages, herd averages. Again, this comes back to that herd level data that we're summarizing here. Cow averages, where we summarize individual cow test day information, reproductive performance, recorded breed distributions, and then we no longer provide the 305ME. We've replaced that with the 305AA, but they're still available here on Web Connect, the historical metrics. So we can get started talking about participation, seeing as we have been discussing that so far in the episode. We'll look at participation. You can look at the different states and territories, decide whichever one you're interested in looking at, or all of them in our case. Also, it can be broken down by breed. We're going to just focus on all breeds for now. We can look at specific years. For this example, I'm going to look at a year range. So as I mentioned, the data start in 1997 and then up till to 2025. I will note that the data are generated at the end of January, beginning of February. So you'll see the years past data populated at the end of January, beginning of February. And then for the statistics, we're going to look at the US cows in DHI herds by year. So we'll put in all of our preferences and then click Run Query. You will see all this information here in terms of what it looks like from the back end. So all the edits that are going into creating these national performance metrics. the reports and some background information. Like, for example, from a herd perspective, the breed of a herd is assigned as the predominant breed in a herd year. So 75% or more of the cows or the does in a herd year of one are of one breed. The herd year is reported as that breed. So this important information that's also included here to give context to the reports. So we're looking here at the dairy cattle US cows and DHI herds by year from 97 to 2005 for all breeds in the US. As I mentioned, in 1997, so we're going to focus here on this column, we're looking at the percentage of US cows, the US cow population in DHI herds. It's about 38%, all the way up to 2025, where we're at 40%. And so this can be viewed in different ways. We can export to CSV. You can create your own graphs. Right now we're in data table view, but we can also look at the graph view. So the one we're most interested here, so we have the different options that are shown, but the one we're most interested in is the cow population in DHI herds by year. So you can see it started at around 38% in 97, and then we're at 40% in 2025. So in terms of participation, as I mentioned, up here we're back to the defaults, and the one we looked at was a year range. So you could also look at it for a specific year and break it down by different statistics as well. So you can do DHI per herds per year, DHI herds and somatic cell count testing by year, testing characteristics, and so on.
Fiona, one of the things that I think people tend to ask a lot of times is the herds that make up this database or that are contributing data. Where are they from? What kind of sizes are they? I know you mentioned we can do it by state and territory, but do you want to grab the herds for 25 and by a herd size maybe, and people can see a little bit zoomed in on this most recent year?
Sure, yeah. So if we're going to look at 2025 specifically, we'll come back to this specific year. We'll select 2025, and then here in the statistics, we have DHI herds and herd sizes by herd size category. So we'll click that, we'll leave the defaults. You can select if there's a particular herd size category you're interested in, or if you want to, from a producer standpoint, if you want to compare characteristics on your herd versus herds of similar size, that's possible too. You can change that here. But for this purpose, I'm going to just look at the defaults and run the query. And so we'll focus on the table here. So we have the herd size category here. So we have from at least 5 cows to maximum 49 cows, from 50 to 99, and so on. And so what's interesting here is when we look at the number of DHI herds in the herd size categories, we can see most of the herds are in the herd size category ranging from at least 5 cows to at maximum 249 cows, right? However, when we look at the number of cows, it's kind of the inverse. So we see that most of the cows belong to the herds that are a minimum of 1,000 cows per herd to 5,000 plus. So we really see the inverse of the number of cows to the number of DHI herds in terms of the herd size category, which also reflects that we're seeing an increase in herd size and merging of herds over time, we'll say.
Now that we have the understanding of what the herds look like, and again, people can explore, they can check this out. If you find it interesting, this is a really good reason to be sharing your data, especially if you're already collecting it, to talk with your milk tester, your DRPC about making sure your checkbox is in the right place, that your data can get to the database to be able to provide these types of benchmarks. But Fiona, let's go further. We had asked you to bring some cool trends in the data that you've found. What do you have to share with us?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to jump here to the cow averages report. And so again, we have similar defaults. They vary a small bit depending on the report, but cow averages look at summarizing the test day data for individual cows. So we're going to look at a trend here again, and I'll leave the defaults from 1997 to 2025. Cow average yields by year, and then we'll leave all parities and all breeds. So we'll run the query, and then once we get down here, we can see the table. And what I want to show here, first of all, is fat percentage. So I'm going to quickly go across here. Oh, we have the mean average fat, the mean percent over the years. And the Y-axis here ranges from 3.6 to 4.4. It's very obvious how this fat percentage has increased rapidly since 2010. Genomic evaluations started in 2010, although fat was incorporated into the net merit many years before that, but we can really see this drastic improvement in the phenotypic trend for fat percentage over time. And on the genetic trends that Kristen presented, it's also shown there, but this is specifically for the phenotypic trend we're showing here. We'll jump to protein next. So we have average protein here, the mean percentage. And again, slightly different trend from 1997 to 2001. But again, since 2010, we see that drastic increase from about, 3.07 percentage up to 3.35% in 2025. So we're seeing a similar trend for protein since genomic evaluations were introduced in the US. So the next one then is, and this is very interesting, is the average somatic cell count. So this is the cells per milliliter in the thousands. Back in 97, we can see this was on average 320,000 cells per milliliter. And now we're down to 179,000 cells per milliliter in 2025. And this one is particularly of note because a lot of producers participate in the DHI program in order to manage somatic cell count for individual cows. And so that is a big priority for producers that are participating. And so to see these trends and the improvement over time is extremely beneficial, we'll say, for them, and it provides that value back for participating and for getting individual cow data for management purposes.
Yeah, that's a really cool graph to see, and I'm sure it aligns pretty closely with when those somatic cell count standards went into place from the processors. A cool graph to see that matches what we would love to see in the industry. All right, what else you got, Fiona?
So from the cow averages then, I mentioned that we also have a report for the reproductive performance. And again, just the same defaults. One nice added feature here is cow or heifer. So you can look at cow reproductive performance or heifer reproductive performance. Again, I'm going to look at the year range. I'm a big fan of trends over time. I think it's interesting to look and then to put the historical information alongside that. You will notice here that reproductive performance data starts in 2003. That's because we started to send that data in, I believe, mid to late 2003. So you'll see that it doesn't contain the full data set, and that's reflected in the numbers that we'll see below. But that's just one difference in this report. So we'll hit run query again. Again, it's for all breeds and all parities. And as I mentioned, just to highlight here in 2003, we see about, let's say, 60% of the data in relation to 2004, and that's because it's a partial year data set. So what I'm going to focus on here, I think I clicked the wrong one. I'm more interested in conception, sorry. So conception here, we're going to look from 2003 up to 2024, and specifically the number of breedings per conception. So we have the mean here, and I'll show this in a graph format. So we'll just go across here to the number of breedings per conception in the mean. This is another very interesting graph in terms of how we have improved over time. So in 2003, it was just below 2.35, and now we're down to 2.08 breedings per conception in 2024. So what we can see here really, again, is when we incorporated in cow conception rate into the net merit, that was in 2014, I believe, we start to see this drastic improvement in reproductive performance and the number of breedings per conception over time.
So, cow conception rate, we know as a trait, so CCR, as it shows up on our evaluations, came onto the scene in 2014, got included in those selection indexes as a way to help manage female reproduction performance and improve that. But what about the management side of this, Fiona? Because these are phenotypes. This isn't just the genetics of the cow. What does the management side impact on this?
Yeah, so we all know that the phenotype is made up of the genotype and the environment, right? So we also know that the phenotypic or the management aspect of this is very important. So around that time, we also saw a lot of improvements in reproductive technologies that were being used at the farm level. So that definitely contributes to this improvement, along with the incorporation of cow conception rate into net merit in 2014. And probably prior to 2014, we saw these improvements as well in reproductive technologies that were being used.
Yeah, and that would be probably true in that somatic cell count graph that we saw as well, right? Where that improvement happens, there's certainly a genetic component to it, but there's a lot of management changes we know on dairies and protocols that have happened in that, what, 30-year span that we were looking at that has also improved our somatic cell count on farms tremendously.
Absolutely. And it all kind of comes back to this importance of taking the milk sample in order to generate that data to also support genetic evaluations. But there's additional value like the herd management aspect, and we provide this aggregated data back through the use of data flowing into the National Cooperator Database as well.
Well, these are great, Fiona. I really enjoy the ones that you picked out for us. And as you mentioned, people can go in and play around in all of this. It's public, it's open. You can benchmark against your farm. You can figure out, you know, your breed, your state, your farm size. You can sort by all of them at the same time and really kind of find those nuanced peer groups to measure yourself against. And as we talk about phenotypic data on this episode, I think it's important to also know that in the genetic evaluations, we account for the herd level effects. Is that fair, Fiona?
Yeah, absolutely. Another aspect of this national performance metrics that are provided by CDCB is that they're aggregated and anonymized data. So there's no individual data being displayed here. It's all aggregated data at the state level, at the breed level and so on. So it's just important to clarify that point, to transparency of these national performance metrics.
Yeah, and we've also been using two terms throughout this episode, right? The National Performance Metrics and the National Cooperator Database. What officially is the relationship between the two? Like, how do they work together or how do they connect?
Yeah, so as we've mentioned multiple times, the DHI data flows into the National Cooperator Database. Then we use the interface here on Web Connect in order to summarize the phenotypic data to provide benchmarks back to everyone essentially is able to access this, but it's also a collaboration with the National Dairy Herd Information Association. And so they produce the uniform operating guidelines for procedures for all the different DHI affiliates. And so we provide these statistics for them annually as well and collaborate to work on those. They provide them back to their collaborators, their members, at their annual meeting, and they distribute it throughout the year as well. And they have an annual report. So they can see in terms of participation at a national level and not just within their own DHI lab or affiliate.
National DHA, an incredible partner in this tool and in on farm initial data collection for the national database, right? They are a part of the creators of the national database as well, 100 years ago. So a huge key player in it. But we also have other people who have been instrumental in getting this tool up and running, refining it over the last months, and the people that support it. So, can you help us, Fiona, kind of tie this episode together with some acknowledgments of the people that have influenced this project and the data?
Absolutely. Just to begin with, there with that, I'd like to start by acknowledging the USDA Agile in terms of they started to calculate these performance metrics. They are available on our website in our resource center in the sort of historical national performance metrics. So CDCB started calculating these once we started to do the genetic evaluations. I'd like to thank and acknowledge Dr. Taylor McWhorter. So Taylor and I worked on this together throughout my master's at the University of Georgia, and then I collaborated some while I was doing my PhD. But Taylor has led this effort in order to get this amazing interface up and running, and also all of the descriptions that go along with it in order to understand the statistics and to be transparent in the performance metrics that we're calculating. I'd like to thank the producers for sharing their data and participating in the DHI program. And then to the extended CDCB staff, this isn't just one or two people, it's a big team effort for being stewards of the National Cooperator Database and providing valuable metrics like these back to producers.
That's perfect. I feel like that's a great way to pull this all together, Fiona, with those really important acknowledgments, and a big thank you to all of them for their roles in this, and a thank you to you for joining us and kind of starting to really show what this tool can do and how people can use it. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks very much, Katie, for the invitation to talk about this.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the CDCB CowCast. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you are streaming. Questions or comments about the topic covered in this episode can be sent to outreach@uscdcb.com. That's outreach@uscdcb.com. Or you can send us a message at the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding on Facebook and LinkedIn. We look forward to hearing from you and see you again next month.